Like many of you, I've followed the trajectory of Ohio's biggest political celebrity for quite some time. And in the last presidential election, I know we all stood behind Governor Kasich and the positive, faith-filled, and hopeful alternative he brought to the Republican Party. But as hate, anger, and divisive speech dominated the election cycle and brought us to today, it's voices like Governor Kasich's that we need more than ever, which is why we are so happy to welcome him to Politics and Prose to discuss his new book, Two Paths, America Divided or United. Please join me in welcoming Governor John Kasich.
So I just wanted to shake somebody's hand, and it was, by the way, if you were available to do warm-ups before I got out to speak, I might have been president, so we should. But, you know, I just shook a friend of mine's hand. I want to tell you, one of the darkest days in my life was in 1987, August. And when I was a little boy, I used to worry that my mother and father, my father would go to pick my mother up at work, and I was always worried because they drove on this really rockety street, the West Carson Street, John, you know that, and I was always afraid they wouldn't come home. I was just a little boy. And in 1987, when I reached 35, I got a call one night at 11:45, your father is dead and your mother's going to die, and you need to get here. And we drove all night long, got to the hospital, and there was a young minister in my mother's room, and he said, I'm really sorry. I started yelling at him, you know, you don't have a clue. And he said, no, I know I don't have a clue. But my mother was a faithful person, and he said, I know that if your mother could come back, she would not. And I was like, wow, wow. It was like being hit by a bolt of lightning. And then a few days later, he started to ask me where I stood vis-a-vis the big guy, okay? And when I was a kid, I sort of felt I knew the big guy because I had a rabbit's foot. I'd just rub it, you know, and I'd get whatever I wished for. When I was a kid, it was a sled. When I got older, it was a girlfriend. I mean, it was all these things, you know. But then I, of course, like most normal people, I completely drifted away from any sort of faith. And so he said to me, you have a window of opportunity you can go through to figure out where you are vis-a-vis that guy. Because, you know, if it involves eternity, you ought to try to at least think about it. And I thought that was pretty good. So I went down to Washington, and I was a deeply broken man. I don't know if any of you have ever been there. But when it comes, and you live in nothing but black, and maybe there's a little tiny pinprick of light, and you try to focus on the light and not the black. And this man over here, John Pelafudis, was working for a congressional friend of mine named Duncan Hunter, and he came to see me. And he said, that little minister that you know, that you met in Pittsburgh, who your mother liked, he and I grew up together. Now Stu is living in Pittsburgh and John is living in Washington. And John then dedicated the next, how long, John? Months to trying to get me healed, which he did. And the story is, through a long, long process, I've become a better man despite a brutally difficult period. And you know, we all know how tough life can be. The editor of, the PR guy that's traveling with me with St. Martin's, I find out yesterday, he said, my wife and I had gone down to Florida, we bought a house, everything was going great, and then she had a major heart problem. Out of the blue, out of nowhere. So one of the little sections of this book is, where do you go when the water rises? And I'm not going around trying to convert everybody because, you know, if you're a humanist, I admire what you do when you wake up every day. But, you know, I was on The Daily Show, which is really a fun show. And I talked about the importance of faith. And then I was at Harvard. and talked about 700 kids. And this was one of the things that came up. And here's what I think is the truth. I think religion in the 21st century has not evolved. It's really boring and divisive, and we see these religious leaders who divide us and play politics and all this other stuff. But then there are others, and I see it as a positive, a hope, a connectiveness, a place where I can go when I don't feel anybody cares about me or anybody loves me, and I feel like I got somewhere I can go. And so my buddy John, who I mentioned in this book, because if I didn't, he'd be gnashing of teeth from him. No, it wouldn't be. Played a very, very big role in helping me to become a better person. The book has a lot of descriptions about what it's like to run for president. It opens with a harrowing story where half the people on our tiny little airplane thought we were going to crash. And we all wonder, you know, why do these politicians die in these plane crashes? And we've read about a lot of them. In fact, in Virginia, there was a guy who had a lot of potential. I've never mentioned this name in 30 years, named Dick Obenshane. And we've seen it around the country. You know, it's because politicians think they need to go somewhere when they don't really need to go somewhere. And it talks about that flight, but then it gets into a lot about the campaign. And the most significant thing that happened in the campaign is I came to realize that just like I did when I was governor, over time, because, you know, I started out, my first 100 days were very rocky until my wife said to me, John, you're the governor of Ohio, which means you're the father of Ohio. Why don't you act like it, okay? And by the way, I related that story to President Trump when I was in the Oval Office. I wasn't trying to imply anything, okay? Just a little story. And so to make a long story short, what I learned in the campaign is that politics is about, you know, issues and, you know, the health bill and the tax cuts and all that other stuff. But I think it's really about the heart and the soul. And I think people in this country want to believe that somebody cares about them. And I'll tell you an interesting thing. It may not be that interesting, but when the Olympics were over and I watched the swimming and these guys, I decided I wanted to look like them. So I took up swimming the end of August. And no, seriously, I'd never been really swimming. This was just unbelievable. And people were laughing at me. I didn't know, but I know they were because it's been told to me. And so one day I went swimming, and my wife happened to be in the pool, and I dropped my smartphone. I don't know if Doug has my smartphone. It's a really smart smartphone. I can't be hacked on it because it's a flip phone, okay? And I dropped it in the water, and it was ruined. And my wife, I was afraid to go down because I'm so bad to go down and get it, so she went down and got it. And we called Verizon. They said, come on over. And so they said, you know, we'll get this done for you in 15 minutes. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Verizon, but there isn't anything that ever happened in 15 minutes, okay? So it was like 15 hours, and finally they gave me my phone, and they had you all been there, right? And I said, what do I owe you? And they said, well, because we had you wait so long, we're going to give you this phone for free. And I go, free phone? And there's like 50 people in there, and they're all like this, you know? So I said, this is really incredible. Juxtapose this to the United Airlines flight, really. And the lady who's running the store, she said to me, well, this is nothing, because last week a lady brought her smartphone in, and we had screwed it up. And we fixed it. And we gave it back to her, and she said, well, what do I owe you? And they said, it's our fault. You don't owe me anything. And she said the woman started to become emotional. And she looked at the manager and she says, nobody does anything like this for anybody anymore. So you know what I did? I called the CEO of Verizon. By the way, for the next 18 months, I can call about anybody I want because I'm the governor of Ohio. After that, not so good. So if any of you want to get in the Cleveland Clinic, ask me now because, you know, I always say if you're a politician, there's nothing more former than a former any politician, because you don't need a phone, though, because nobody will take your calls and no one will ever return them. I know that. I even write about this in the book. When I left Congress, the year before I left, I was invited, I think, to 41 or 42 Christmas parties. And the year I left, I got invited to 2, and one of them was my own. So, but anyway, I called the CEO of Verizon, and I told him about this woman. And I said, you need to do something about this, and her assistant, who was a cool guy, too. And so he went on some sort of talk to all the people at Verizon, which they do, and celebrated these two people. The point of the story is we all want to feel like, well, it's back to Cheers, that somebody knows our name, that somebody cares about us, that somebody will celebrate with us. And that doesn't mean that policy doesn't matter, but in the course of policy, we have to keep in mind that what this means for people. And we have to connect our hearts. And we all have to do it. Now, I know that these problems seem immense. But you see, I think that we can fix the country if we're willing to take this on ourselves. One of my friends said to me the other day, he said, you're not giving people enough sense of what they can do to fix this. He said, why don't you ask everybody to at least spend 10 minutes every day reading something that they don't agree with? I happen to think that driving things from the bottom up where we live, whether it's engaging in a program to mentor kids, or whether it is going to the food bank, or even so simple as rounding up so that you can help support the food bank, or whether it's fighting the opiate crisis, because the DEA has told me the only way we will win this battle is if we educate people, starting at a very young age and all the way through, and that's on all of us, even with people we don't know. So I went to Atlanta at the invitation of Bernice King, Martin Luther King's daughter, invites me to go to Atlanta at the Martin Luther King Center. I'm like, what in the world is going on? So I go down, and I had my daughter Reese, and we went through the house and took a picture outside of Dr. King's house. And then I walked down the street. I didn't know how to say this to people because it sounded a little self-congratulatory, but a lot of people down there, almost all African Americans, I could feel their warmth. Like, he's okay. He's a good guy. Boy, that was unbelievable to me. And then we went to this, I was interviewed, and then they went to the audience, which was 300-400 people, and somebody shouts out, what about Trump? And I said, sir, what about your neighbor? What about your family? Dr. King couldn't even get a meeting with the politicians. So he started in his community based on moral principles. And then black and white and rich and poor and blue and red and all this other nonsense, political nonsense, we all joined together. And we demanded justice and the condition of morality in the country on the issue of race. He didn't do it from the top down, he did it from the bottom up. So I think all of us have to do our part. Stop waiting on somebody else to show up and fix your problem, because they ain't coming. Unless they might be your neighbor, or maybe your relative, or just somebody who could be a stranger that sees you having a problem. Now, this all sounds great. I wish I wasn't a jerk sometime, okay? Because we all fall short. You know, we live our life, and I'll conclude here, we live our life at a base level. We just kind of go about the humdrum of our day. But every once in a while, we do something that's a little bigger than ourselves. I just gave a medal to a guy who was a bus driver who stopped his bus in the middle of traffic and talked a woman jumping off a bridge. And I gave him a medal because, and he didn't tell, this went viral, and nobody knew about this except the camera on the bus captured it. And did he change the world? Yeah. I gave him this medal, you know, and I said, did you ever think you'd get a medal? He said, it's nothing I ever thought about. But that's all we have to look for. And some days we're going to live in the basement. It's inevitable. We do something that we're embarrassed by, or, you know, I'll sign up to that first. But, you know, in life we have a chance to get up every day and do a little bit better. So that's kind of the way I think about it. Slow down a little bit, pay attention to somebody else, and that goes for me, John. Hear me, okay? Because it's true. we can have a much more hopeful, united country if we focus on the things that unite us. Because, you know, poverty, drug addiction, children, lonely seniors, veterans, helping them is not blue or red. It's us as Americans. So I hope you'll get something from this book, and we'll give you a little bit of a roadmap as to how we got here and how we get out of this mess. And this is a small little trip. I started here on Sunday. I went to New York, and then I went to Boston. I went up to New Hampshire, where this all started, and then I came back to Washington, and then I'm going to Philadelphia, and then Columbus to go to Dayton, Cincinnati, and then I go to Cleveland, and then Chicago, and then Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Texas, and Florida. So it's an abbreviated trip, and but we're having a lot of fun. So thank you. I'm just blown away by who's here today, and I want to thank you very, very much. So we should sign books, right? Oh yeah, a couple questions. Few questions. Come on. Yes. Four. I talk too long. God darn it. Okay. Let's see how we do. I'm going to answer them as shortly as I can, but I'm not good at this. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello, Governor. My name is Amanda Linton. I live in Woodbridge, Virginia. Thank you for actually helping me celebrate my 39th birthday today. And
all right. Happy birthday.
Thank you. I'm a staunch Democrat,
Yeah.
but considering the dynamics of the Democratic Party right now, watching you in the debates, I felt like I actually related to you out of everybody, including the Democratic Party. And I wish for the life of God of me that you had been the Republican nominee, because you would have gotten my vote. So you would have been my first Republican vote, for that matter. And so with the current situation with the Democratic Party, I just would personally like to ask you if you would consider running in 2020.
Okay. Well, yes. Well, I'm going to give you my wife's phone number. You know, I don't know what I'm going to be doing. The only thing I know is my future's ahead of me. But, you know, I have to look at what I feel called to do, and we'll have to see. And I really appreciate what you said. I'll tell you quickly, I was in Munich at a conference on cybersecurity on a panel, and there were 5 of us, and one of them was a Russian. And the time came for him to speak. He was a flack for Putin. Time came for him to speak, and he started off by saying, I'm so excited. I am so excited that I'm on this panel with my favorite candidate for president, John Kasich. And I said, here's what's true. The people who like me the best were either Russians or Democrats. So but we'll see. Thank you. But I'm not going to go away, okay? I'm not going away. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor.
Hi, Governor Kasich. My name is Steve Popick. From 2006 to 2013, I served the U.S. public as the statistical expert for the Department of Justice on voting rights, voting redistricting, and voter ID and other issues. I caught your talk at Harvard on Wednesday and greatly enjoyed it, even though it was 2 hours. I did watch it.
I was only 1 hour. Wasn't it 1 hour?
There was questions.
It seemed like 2. I got you.
It was great.
Well, you know,
regardless.
100 days, 100 years, you know.
And
You didn't even get that. Okay, go ahead.
And you spoke about your efforts in Ohio to reform redistricting there, particularly 2 proposals. One about a supermajority requirement for redistricting, or a independent citizens redistricting commission. Alternatively, of course, California in 2012 also instituted nonpartisan primaries, which is another really interesting idea. I note that there's a lot of commonalities between what you're doing in Ohio and what President Obama is wanting to do post-office. And so my question to you is, are you going to reach out to him in sort of a joint effort, or at least a communication, about what we can do to improve the redistricting that's going on in our country? Because we are choosing, politicians are choosing their people, and vice versa.
Here's what happens. We gerrymander. That's one term it seems like stuck with people. Gerrymandering, drawing a district so it favors one party over the other. So it used to be, if you got gerrymandered in a safe district, that was great, because then you could go and do all these things that was against the grain. And now, of course, if you do that, then you get primaried from the right if you're a Republican, or primaried from the left if you're a Democrat. So everybody moves like this. It is critical that we reform the system. Now, the guy that started it, you should know, he's a former governor of California. and his name is Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he is the one that implemented this and begged me to do something. And I become convinced that this is really a direction we ought to head. I've talked to the legislature about it, and I think we're going to move forward on this. And there's one other thing that you need to be aware of. I believe the Supreme Court was dead wrong, or if even they were dead right, Congress needs to enact something so a handful of billionaires cannot decide who the President of the United States is. It's horrible. Okay. So we need to get there. Okay, yes, right here.
Hi. Thank you for being here.
Be the voice. Now, you're not an activist, I can tell by that shirt. Okay?
I'm a volunteer activist, so
Okay.
I'm not a paid lobbyist. But
Okay.
I'm really glad that you got the chance to meet all of us today. And
Okay.
don't we look thinner in person?
Yes.
I just retired from the fire department. I spent 27 years as a career firefighter in Fairfax County, Virginia. Last year, one of our firefighters died by suicide. It broke my heart, and so as a result of that, I got really, really involved with suicide prevention. I've lobbied on Capitol Hill for firefighter issues, including the 9/11 health care bill, the Zadroga bill, which provided health care for 70,000 first responders. So as we sit here today enjoying this awesome book signing, over on Capitol Hill, Congress is having discussions about our health care. And one of the things that they are talking about is a change in the health care to remove treatment for mental health and for drug addiction. And I'm a lifelong Democrat, but like you, I believe that bipartisanship is the only way to get anything done, either on a state level
That's
or
sustainable.
Yes. So my question is, what would your advice be? Because it's so disheartening to see politicians, the absolute thing for the Democrats was those essential health care benefits. So why, when they come back to the table to talk about it, is it the first thing they attack? So what would your advice be to Congress to try to come together so that we can get a bill that helps everybody?
You know, I fought this bill because, and here's the reason, I do believe the whole healthcare system needs dramatic reform because the exchanges are really weakening, and the Medicaid does cost the federal government a lot of money, and we can, in fact, over time, reduce the cost of the federal government where we in the states can do a little bit more. That's all fine, and it needs to be reformed. But the idea that we have eliminated the resources, at least half of them, about half of them, and we're going to repeal Medicaid expansion in 2020, which is really doesn't make any sense either. Like, I don't support this health care bill. And I've tried to talk to some of my friends in the Congress. Tonight I hope I'm going to see Charlie Dent, a congressman from over in Pennsylvania, who's fought a good fight. And as long as the answer is they need to sit down with some Democrats, and the Democrats can't sit there and say, oh, well, the Republicans will hold the bag and then they're going to get killed in the election, and isn't that good? I mean, Democrats were celebrating the defeat of the bill as a great victory for them. I mean, come on. You can't get energy from negativity. So the fact is that talk to your congressman. Write your congressman. Email. You know what? They all notice. They know everybody. So you need to just tell them that these benefits. Let me just say one last thing about all this. If you're a child, if you're mentally ill, if you're drug addicted, and you're working poor, you're the easiest people to run over. And this gets back to this issue that I talk about with faith, which is love your neighbor. We're all equal at the end of the day. We all go into the same box, and we can't not just run over people who are weak, because we will be held accountable. I believe that's a conservative position, okay? I mean, you got to give everybody a chance to be lifted. And, you know, the mentally ill, you know how many times they've got to go see the doctor? The drug addicted, how many times you get treatment and how many times you'll fail? So we can't run over people like that. And so I'm very concerned about what they're doing, but apparently they still don't have the votes, and I hope that the Democrats will join the Republicans or ask to join the Republicans to come up with something that needs reformed. Healthcare needs reformed. Let's do it together. Okay? Thank you. Whatever you say.
Hi, Governor. My name is Betsy Johnson, and I am somebody who thinks that climate change is a crisis. And I was very glad to read that you think that climate change actually exists and that people are responsible. And I'm wondering, if you had been elected president, what would you have done about climate change?
Well, look, I'll tell you what I'm doing as governor. I believe in renewable energy, solar and wind and efficiency standards. And and these are mandates in Ohio, which we can meet. But my legislature, on some philosophical basis, sent me a bill that went from mandates to options, to goals. And I told them, if you send it to me, I'll veto it. And I don't like to veto. That's the worst thing to do at the end. But they sent it to me, so I vetoed it. Now they're trying to do it again. And we need to be, well, one of the things is we can't worship the environment, but we need to take care of it. We need to guard it. I'm very concerned about the, about so many aspects of it. My daughter Reese came to me and she said, Daddy, she's 17 years old. She said, Daddy, I'm really worried about what's happening in the oceans down in the coral reef, and I'm like, Reese, what do you know about that? I mean, she ought to be, in office. She will maybe someday. But we have to be concerned about that. And and the places now we're seeing our rainforests begin to disappear. Now, nobody cares about the rainforest really unless you're, are in the Audubon Society or something. But here's the thing. We don't know what health remedies lurk in the rainforests. We don't want to be destroying stuff. We really have to be concerned about it, and we don't have to be extreme. Let's just take some actions and take some steps. And so I'm doing it in Ohio and telling these legislators I want to be part of a national solution. And so my words are louder, or my actions are even louder than my words. So I don't worship the environment, but I want to be a good steward of it. After all, we love to go out in the woods and hike, and there's a great chapter in here about being out in the woods with my daughters. They were about 8 or 9, and we had a long walk in the woods, and we came around the corner, and there was a hulking moose that jumped right in front of us. Now, the moose is a very dangerous animal. It's not like Bullwinkle, okay? These are tough animals. And this moose weighed, well, more than 1,000 pounds. It was giant. If you ever seen one, it's incredible what they're like. And it starts snorting, and that's not a sign that they want to give you a little kiss. So I was in front with Emma, and Karen and Reese were behind, and I was holding on to Emma's hand and started to squeeze it, and we started to walk backwards. And finally, it seemed like an interminable amount of time, the moose finally disappeared back into the forest. And we walked about 10 or 15 minutes longer, and I finally looked at Emma, and I said, Emma, what did you think about that moose? And she said, what moose, Daddy? Her little mind could not comprehend what she had just seen. And that is a metaphor for our country at some time. There is a moose. There's no what moose, Daddy. Okay? So you'll see that in the book. Yes, sir. Democrats for Kasich. I think my father might have been one of them.
This must be the Democrat line over here. You can tell from my shirt. We're all a little to your left, as you notice, but Democrats. Right. But I just want to thank you for your stand for health care, and that's why I went to work on your campaign a little bit up in Ohio. I was glad to be there the night of your victory party. Because
a lot of confetti that night.
Yeah, right. The idea that as a Christian you were willing to put aside politics because you cared about poor people and the working poor, basically, and expand Medicaid and so forth, meant that I had to do something I'd never done before, and that's put aside politics and be there to support you. And I guess I really don't have a question, but I want to know that you're continuing to do that. And
yeah, we're going to do what we can, and it's not just some. I don't read the Bible to figure out what I'm going to do.
Right.
But it does give you some warnings, right, John, about the need to pay attention to people. Like if I was hungry, did you feed me? Did you have clothes? Did you give me some
9 through
clothes?
25.
And
yeah.
so that's important, but it was absolutely the right thing to do, and
Yeah.
And I'm going to keep at it as long as I can.
Well,
and
the
try
idea-
to be fair.
The idea is that most of us probably in this room, graduated from college, I would imagine, and we all get health care the first day we go to work, and we'll always have it. The people who are working poor almost never get offered health care.
Well, Robert Taft Sr., who was he was known as Mr. Conservative, he ran against Eisenhower for president, didn't win, and he was voted one of the 5 greatest United States senators in our history. He was there from 1939 to 1953, and he said if people in our country can't afford health care, we ought to give it to them. Now, that was pretty amazing for somebody called Mr. Conservative. Look, it's not about being namby-pamby. We have to have an economic system that produces growth, and jobs. People say I would rather live in an area of high poverty than in an area of high joblessness. That is a given. But I want people to understand that we have to come together in this country now, and there's so many ways to do it. And just because you care about the environment doesn't make you a rhino. And just because you care about poor people doesn't make you a rhino. These are things that should pull us together, okay? Now, that doesn't mean on Obamacare, I think the thing is fundamentally flawed, but it can be fixed. And we need to think about it in those terms. And you know what? Politicians need to be more comfortable reaching out and saying things that they think but they don't want to say because they think they're going to be attacked. So, you know, get real is a good, maybe I should have called the book Get Real. I don't know. Okay, we got to get going. Yes, it's up to you. Yes.
You know, you were in Congress in 1987, and the 30 years since, I mean, I don't think Congress then was like it is now. I mean, everybody says, oh, I'm willing to work with you if we could have common ground, but nobody wants to give anything. The Democrats think that they're right, and Republicans think that they're right. I mean, there used to be debates on the Senate floor and everything where people talked about issues rather than name-calling and everything. Do you think...
Can I come back? Yeah, if you demand it, if we all demand it,
I mean, and like with gerrymandering, they're in safe districts. They can do whatever they want, but they're going to get reelected. I mean, the system...
No, I have to tell you, if we're waiting for the politicians to reverse this, we're going to be waiting forever. It has to start with us. You know, and I don't know why we're so worried about Washington. How much does... I mean, look, I know it has an impact on us, but on a day-to-day basis, you're a heck of a lot more affected by what happens with your neighbor, in your neighborhood, in your community, with your schools. And we spend all of our time focused on this big thing out here. And the big thing out there, I mean, I had somebody say to me yesterday, a school teacher, talking about Betsy DeVos. I said, Betsy DeVos isn't going to is going to affect your school. It's your school board and the teachers you work with. So forget all. Look, people went from bowling into politics. I think you ought to go back to bowling. Take up bowling, okay? We'll be a happier country. Should we sign? Okay, I want to sign some books.